I'm going to request a motion to amend our agenda. Okay. Any discussion on that? All right, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, so the first item, presentation, is presentation of the Fairfield Public Schools operational audit conducted by Prismatic Inc. I'll turn this over to Dr. Title, and we'll get going on this.
Okay, thank you. Tasha Pito from Prismatic Services is here. Her firm conducted the operational audit, and the complete audit will be posted on the website tomorrow. She has a presentation. We have copies of that. We'll make more copies of it. So I'm going to turn it over to her. We've all just seen it right now. So this is the first I've seen it or anybody else. So we'll turn it over to Tasha, and we're going to have to move around. Thanks. Slide over that way.
Sir, hi. I'm better standing. It hurts like heck to sit.
Now I got to make sure. I was going to make it work. That's why I like it.
I did. You did. You actually. My chair. At this.
We literally just got it.
Is it that one?
No, I mean, they're literally.
Might be there. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, this literally was just handed. They couldn't make copies of it.
No luck?
Oh, it was. It was.
I'll do it.
Can I drag that over with me?
I could just do
Let's take the left one.
Go like this. How's that?
Good evening, Dr. Title, members of the board, members of the public. Thank you very much on behalf of everyone at Prismatic for having me here tonight to present the results of our operational audit. One of the most perhaps overused cliches or quotes out there is, "We are living in historic times." I laugh every time I hear someone say this, yet there is an element of truth in that, particularly for American education over the next couple of years. We're living in times that are at least uncharted, if not historic. Several noted experts have predicted that school districts are going to face difficult financial times through at least 2014. Districts are being squeezed by federal realignments and reprioritizations, which mean less money for them. States, for the first time ever, 2 years in a row, have shrunk their budgets overall. Fairfield's fairly insulated from some of these things. However, the predicted recovery of the real estate market is not very bright in the near-term future. Concurrent with that, there's a national discussion going on as to what education should actually look like moving forward. In a large part, many of the things that we see in a typical classroom haven't changed for hundreds of years almost, and spurred on by things like the Waiting for Superman movie and a real questioning of where is the best place to spend our money. It's highly likely that in the next couple of years, education may look very different from the way it looks now. Go ahead. It's in this environment in which Fairfield Public Schools undertook this audit. And I'd like to say up front that Fairfield is under no obligation to implement any of the recommendations that we have presented. Unlike some of the other projects we work on, we weren't given a task of, oh my gosh, we have to find $5 million out of the budget tomorrow. That was not our task. The goal was much loftier in the sense of we'd like to know where we could be more efficient or effective in the district. If that means a monetary savings, great, because we recognize the environment in which we are living. However, there was no mandate to find a certain amount of savings, and there is no obligation on the part of the district to implement the recommendations. We hope, after you look at the evidence that we provide in the report, that you will. That's the intent with which the recommendations are given. Tonight I'm going to go over the team and our approach so you can understand how we got to the report you have in your hands. I'm going to give you an overview of the report, what's contained in it. I'm going to talk about the findings, commendations, and recommendations at about the 30,000-foot level. And we're going to talk a little bit about the costs and savings associated with the recommendations. Our team. The team is comprised primarily of 5 professionals. I'm the baby on the team. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've logged over 150 school districts at this point, and Connecticut marks my 26th state. It was really great to get over that halfway there hump. The rest of the team members all have decades of experience. All of them, except one, have worked extensively in school districts. The one that hasn't was our public facilities expert. And then rounding out the team at the bottom, you see Diane Lane. She was specifically selected for this team because she had been a teacher, superintendent, and board member in a district almost exactly the same size as Fairfield. And she faced many of the same challenges that you're facing now. Our audit approach. One of the things I'd like you to understand about our audit approach is where we come from in doing these things. Audit often is interpreted as a dollars and costs sorts of approach. Our audit approach comes from a different beginning. We look at everything in a school district from the perspective of what's best for students. We don't look at personalities. We don't look at the structure as it is and try to make excuses for why it is that way. We look at what's best for students. And I can give you a couple of examples. I'll stick with one in the interest of time. I had the pleasure of meeting a college president 2 weeks ago who is implementing transformation in his college. It's a college in South Carolina. And one of the things that he has done as part of that transformation is to require everyone in the employment of that college to answer the question on their evaluation every year, what have you done to support students and how have you contributed to student success? That refocusing, he credits with being the reason that that college is moving forward. I could give you numerous examples from business as well where that kind of laser-like focus provides the impetus for true transformation and change. It's from that approach that you have the mechanics that you see on the slide. So in terms of mechanics, we followed a 10-step approach. We did an advanced visit in September. There were 2 of us on that visit. In that time period, we conducted 31 interviews. We had previously sent to the district an initial data request list, and we always put initial in quotes, of 110 documents that we wanted to look at. The district did a fabulous job in providing us every single thing that we asked for. And then we collected more on top of that as we went through the audit. We did a staff survey in September. All staff were given the opportunity to participate in an online confidential survey that was submitted only to Prismatic. Those few categories of employees who did not have access to email were provided a paper version that was data entered and included in the results. Of that, we got 634 responses. We provided an opportunity for the public to give input. That was also in September. We received 126 emails, which for a district of this size is largely unprecedented in my experience. It has resulted in about 55 pages of reading material for the team. We did comparisons to peers. These were selected in concert with district staff, and we use those as appropriate throughout the report. We did the on-site visit with a full team of 5 in October. We started from an initial interview schedule of 54 interviews. That was supplemented as the week went on, depending on where our analysis led us. We completed 19 focus groups, and every school was visited at least once, although it may not have been visited for every area. It may have been visited just for facilities, or in my case, just to look at transportation operations. In developing our recommendations, we relied on research studies, best practices, and industry standards. So the 260 pages you have in front of you, it's 260 cover to cover, represent 468 plus consulting hours on our part. I'm going to give you an overview of the report. And these are some important guidelines to keep in mind as you read through it. As I said, it's 260 pages. What we do in the interest of saving trees and making it a manageable report that people can carry around is the only things that are included in the report are areas where there is what is called a finding. If we come across an operation that's working well, you know, it's okay, it's not great, it's not in need of repair, you're not going to see it addressed in the report. It doesn't mean we didn't look at it. We looked at many, many things, and those who were interviewed can tell you that we asked about a lot more things and requested far more documents than you'll see referenced in the report. Those are areas where things are working well enough. They did not lead to a finding. In the report, a finding can lead to either a commendation or a recommendation. If something in the district is working really well and things are great and we want to commend the district and provide support for continuing whatever that is, we awarded a commendation. If we found an area in need of improvement, we provided a recommendation. In all, the report you have contains 25 commendations and 74 recommendations. People always ask me, is that typical? That's a pretty typical ratio of commendations to recommendations. On the right-hand side in the box, you'll see how the report is structured. We start at organization and management, move to technology, and go all the way down through safety and security. So what I'm going to do is go through each one of those areas. I am not going to go through every commendation and recommendation in the report. You're going to have to trust me to go through some of the highlights in each one of the areas, and then I'd be happy to take questions afterwards if you have some specifics about those particular areas. So starting right at the top, organization and management. We gave a number of commendations in this area. The biggest ones are really the district's moving in the right direction in a lot of areas. Your new superintendent has come in and made some changes that are very positive and has plans to make some more positive changes. We wanted to give a commendation for that so that that work can continue. And despite some public perception, central office staff has only increased minimally in the past 5 years. In comparison to your peers, things are good, and so we commended that. In terms of recommendations, I'll tell you, these are probably, as you get through the report, these two are probably the most controversial recommendations in the report. We've recommended a new central office structure. That includes a realignment of a number of positions for the people who work in the central office. It includes refocusing on supporting schools, what's best for students. We found that, like many organizations, there had been some drift, there had been some siloing in the central office, and so we wanted to correct that. Our other recommendation is a new high school structure. While we found a fair amount of emotional attachment to the house plan in the high school system, we could find very little to support continuing it from a cost perspective. We did not see any relationship between that structure and improved academics, and we saw some clear needs for some other things in high schools. And so we've recommended a new high school structure. In technology, we did find some areas in the district where procedures are becoming technology-based. And we're not a company that will recommend technology for the sake of technology. Technology is important because it will save time, it will save staff time, it will allow you to do things in a deeper way in many cases. And so that's the reason technology is good to have. Not technology for the sake of technology, but for technology for the sake of leveraging your resources, your people, the best way possible. We made a number of recommendations in this chapter. And I think you can see from us placing this chapter directly behind organization and management, we feel that this is an area the district has a fair amount of work to do. We've recommended that the district recommit to technology. And what does that mean? The district has a technology plan. We looked at the technology plan. The district has not always funded the technology plan in many areas. The district has not always stuck with that technology plan as priorities shift and things get moved around. And so we've recommended the district take a look at the technology plan that you have, decide to what are you going to commit, and then stick with it. And we've recommended the district commit to off-the-shelf solutions. One of the things that I hear almost every district I go to is, we're unique. And strictly speaking, from the definition of the word, every district is unique. However, districts, by and large, are in the same business, ensuring the success of their students. It is far better, in terms of technology, to leverage the resources of 150 or 200 school districts that have combined to support a off-the-shelf software package than to try to create your own. It is worth the sacrifice of, I'm going to have to change my process a little bit in order to live with this new software package. It is not, off-the-shelf is much better than many of the things that we see going on here in the district. And so we encourage you to commit to off-the-shelf. We also recommended, and this may sound similar, but it's not, we've recommended that the district rethink technology. This district is rich in a number of resources. It has a very committed parent base. It has teachers who are top-notch. It has very committed staff. However, what we don't see happening in this district are some of the more, not even cutting edge, but leading edge technology applications in the classroom. There are school districts that have gone completely book-free, and we've seen those districts. You know, they issue the child the equivalent of a Kindle. All your textbooks are there. Is that more expensive? In many cases, no. It's not. We've seen districts that have implemented a one-to-one laptop initiative and gone the extra step of saying, you know what, the child needs to do their homework on this. They take that laptop home with them every single night. There's a district in North Carolina doing that, 4th grade and up. Now, the research is preliminary in this area, and I know that many times we say roll out technology, districts say, wait a second, we need to see some research that proves this. This is a very fast-moving area of education. The district in North Carolina that has rolled out laptops to every child 4th grade and up is seeing 3 things: improved academic achievement, improved student attendance, and a decrease in discipline. And they're in about their 3rd year of rollout. So we're encouraging the district to step back and decide how you want to look as a district technology-wise. Do you want to be a district that is leading edge in terms of technology, and what will that mean to your students and your classrooms? We think you have the resources to be one of those districts. Go ahead. Financial management. We gave a number of commendations in financial management. The implementation of the particular munis modules within financial management has been commendable and done with very little impact or negative impact on daily operations. We also commended the district for the distribution of budget information, because everybody and anybody who wants to see what's going on in the budget is able to get access to that information. That's not always true in all school districts. We made a couple of recommendations in this area. The most important ones are probably those on the screen. We recommend that the district implement board summary reports, and this means a regular financial status report that is fairly concise, provides you with some year-over-year comparisons, lets you know where you as a district are financially, and that the district provide training to the board members on how to understand those and get them every board meeting. We're recommending some improvements in purchasing. This is one of those recommendations you're going to need to do with the town of Fairfield. Your purchasing thresholds have some troubles. There are some largely paper-based processes associated with how you're doing your purchasing. We recommend that you work with the town to raise the threshold and perhaps remove some of the competitive bidding requirements for your lower dollar items. And then finally in this area, we recommend tracking fixed assets. It's not something the district is currently doing in terms of spending taxpayer dollars and then accounting for the whereabouts of each one of those items that have been spent. We need to have a system for tracking those. Human resources. We kind of cheated a little in this area. There were so many wonderful things going on in human resources. We rolled it up in one commendation, but it has a number of parts you'll see in the report, that there's a number of good things going on in human resources. Certainly it is a very lightly staffed area and still managing to be very effective. We recommended 2 things in this area. We're recommending a discontinuance of the intern program. The district employs a number of college students to work as interns. Because of the cost of that program and the low turnover within the district, we're recommending you eliminate it. You don't need to have a crop of 41 new teachers being groomed every year. You simply don't need that many teachers every year. We're also recommending that the district develop and implement an improved instructional professional development plan. We saw a number of areas where that needed some work. Facilities. I should mention that because of the timing of this review, we did not look at any redistricting. That was off the table for this review. We did not look at any of the areas that MGT reviewed in terms of capacity utilization, enrollment projections, any of those things. So this area was limited by those constraints for the review. We commended you for having facilities in good condition, largely well-maintained, very little maintenance backlog, and cleaned to acceptable standards. Here we recommended a computerized maintenance management system. This is one of those areas where we're largely doing things on paper, pencil, email, telephone. and we need to move into a new way of doing this. You'll save staff time, you'll save staff resources, and you'll be more effective with a computerized system. We also had some concerns with some of the custodial oversight, and while the number of positions for custodians was fine, we're recommending some team lead custodial positions to help provide better oversight on a day-to-day basis. Food services. A number of good things happening in this part of the district. We commended the district for effective and efficient operations in a number of areas within food services. We also commended the district for pursuing healthy food certification under the Connecticut program. That program actually is not solely focused on food services. It impacts everything that goes on in your district, from your vending machines to your class pizza parties to your football meals, meals for the football team before the games, and undertaking that certification is very commendable. We recommended a number of things. The two largest ones in food services were an increase in student meal prices. You have a tiered pricing structure right now among your secondary students. They can get a deluxe meal, or they can get what's called a type A lunch meal. Your deluxe meal is already priced at $3.50. Your type A meal is priced lower than that. In fact, your lunch meals at all three levels, elementary, middle, and high school, are lower than your peer average, and in all but one case is lower than every single other peer. So it's time to move those up a bit. We also made some recommendations regarding secondary access. There are a couple of problems. The first problem with your access is, in some cases, your dining facilities are entirely too small for the numbers of kids you're trying to put through there. In one case, I counted tables, chairs, watched kids climb over each other in their backpacks, and then placed a call to the town fire marshal to see just how bad it was. You'll see that in the report based on what they said. We're going to have to make adjustments in the way we do things in order to provide students with an opportunity for a school meal, which is supposed to be a nutrition break, a social break, and a break from the academic day. The other issue with secondary access, and I got to say, in 15 years, this was a new one for me. There's always something new. Both of the high schools engage in what I'll term the questionable practice of allowing their students to opt out of a lunch and take an additional academic class. We counted, based on district data, about 32% of your students, high school students on a day-to-day basis, do not have access to a lunch meal because of the way the scheduling works. Now, I understand from the way you have set up your schedules that the lunch period is a full class period long. It doesn't have to be that way. Not all of your peers, in fact, 2 of your peers don't allow this kind of hyper-competitive opt-out of lunch scenario. A number of your peers have put into place another mechanism for allowing everyone access to lunch and still managing to get their academic classes in. So we're recommending that we address that issue. Go ahead. Transportation. A number of good things going on in this department. We commended the department for being responsive and effective. You probably don't ever hear about the hundreds of phone calls that this department fields at the beginning of the year asking for changes to stops on bus routes. Each one of those is addressed and documented. Also, the district offers fairly short ride times, on average about a little less than 15 minutes for your average student. We made a couple of recommendations in this area. One, which may ultimately be controversial, is reviewing your bell times. Currently, the way you want to operate your transportation department is you want to do what's called tiering your buses. It makes no sense from a cost standpoint to have a bus go out in the morning, pick up one batch of kids, deliver them, and then repeat that process in the afternoon. You want to tier your bus routes so that that bus picks up a batch of high school kids, comes back, picks up a batch of middle school kids, comes back, and picks up a batch of elementary school kids. That's called triple tiering. That's the most cost-effective way for you to operate your transportation operation. And the way Connecticut is structured, you receive almost no reimbursement from the state for operating transportation. Therefore, every dollar that you spend in transportation, almost every dollar, 99% of them I think, comes right out of your general fund. Every dollar you can save in transportation can be spent on ensuring student success in a far more demonstrable way. And so we've recommended that you review your bell times with an eye towards getting towards being able to triple tier your buses. Right now, only 19 of about 132 buses are triple tiered. We also recommend that you take a look at the research. And the research shows in a number of areas that students, high school students in particular, are simply biologically better off with a late start time. And so that's something to consider, depending on how you want to arrange it. Finally, we recommended, we're running a lot of fairly empty buses, and the reason for that is we're holding a seat on the bus for every student. We've made a couple of recommendations to change that. The biggest one is you have high school students who have parking slots. We know who those high school students are because they have to register for a parking spot. We're recommending that they be required to opt out of a bus seat if they're going to drive. And this is a situation where the district's transportation department is already at a level where they would be able to handle these kinds of requests and be able to handle the kid coming back and saying, I'm sorry, I can't drive right now, I need to get back on the bus. And we can provide them with a seat again within a couple of days. Okay? Last slide. The last area is safety and security. Strictly speaking, this was not within the scope of our review. Strictly speaking, this was not within the scope of our review, but as we go through schools and central offices, we feel an obligation to report anything that falls in the area of potential safety and security problem. We made a couple of recommendations in this area. The biggest two is we recommend that the district maintain a database of their fire safety equipment. We found a number of fire extinguishers out of date. You currently contract with someone to complete those inspections. However, in your bidding documents, you don't provide the number of fire extinguishers or fire safety equipment to be inspected. You also don't provide the locations. And so the contractor was left with a situation of trying to find these. We found a few for them and pointed them out. But we need to have a database of that. That could be tied back into your facilities maintenance management system as a safety issue. And then finally, in the area of safety and security, we recommend that you take a strong look at separating the traffic circulation around your schools. From a best practices standpoint, pedestrian, car rider, and bus traffic should be strictly separated. In at least one of your schools, that occurs. In a number of other schools, we observed not only that not occurring. In one school, I got a great shot of an almost accident between a car rider and a bus. We need to address that issue. And if it means that we tier the dismissal times, the bus students get out 2 minutes earlier, 5 minutes earlier, the car riders have to wait, then that's what we need to do. But that's an issue that shouldn't be open for too much discussion. Estimated costs and savings. Okay, there's a couple of points that I would like you to take with you as you begin to read the report. Many of the recommendations in our report don't have any specific costs or savings, and we would say that up front. They're intended to help you formalize, improve, or streamline your operations. Ultimately, we think that it will give you some kind of savings, perhaps not a dollar savings, but staff time savings, so that they can focus on other things. Some of the recommendations in our report have a net cost. We went in with the idea of improving efficiency and effectiveness, but as I said right at the beginning, sometimes you have to spend $1 to save a couple of dollars later, and those recommendations are outlined as such. Several recommendations will likely generate savings, but we did not estimate specific savings. The reason for that is because you may take any one of a number of different paths, each of which would have a different cost associated with it. For example, the recommitting the district to technology. If you adopt a technology plan that includes a life cycle costing and a replacement cycle of every 3 years for your technology, that'll have a much different cost than if you adopt a technology plan that says we're going to replace equipment every 5 years. And so we did not estimate savings where we would have to infer which direction in which you might go. And then finally, we've not assumed a timeline of implementation for each recommendation. What you're going to see in the report is we've estimated fiscal impacts over 5 years. Most of your fiscal impacts are the same every single year. There are a couple of them where we say, okay, you're going to need to spend some money here, you're going to see some savings 3 years later, and we've estimated that for you. However, please do not walk out feeling that all 74 recommendations implementation needs to begin tomorrow. That is not the way to implement systemic transformational change in a school district. We've done it as a contrivance in the report because there is no other way to do it without assuming that you're going to do recommendation 5 first and then recommendation 12. We can't do that for you. So usually the first question I get when I conclude the presentation is always, so what do we do now? So I went ahead and created a slide to try to give you some ideas for the next steps moving forward. My first recommendation on that is review the report. I've spent about 30 minutes talking. There's a lot more depth in the 260 pages that we provided to you. We recommend that you decide what can be implemented now. Of your 74 recommendations, first, stop, take a minute, congratulate yourselves on the 25 commendations. Make sure you protect whatever processes or procedures in there we've commended. And then take a look at the 74 recommendations. Decide, what can we do now? What are the easy ones? You want to fix the traffic circulation around some of your schools. That can be implemented tomorrow with a couple of cones in some cases. You may decide on a more permanent solution later. And then decide what can only be implemented later, as long as there is a good reason for why it can only be implemented later. In a couple of cases, we've made some recommendations that may require discussion with unions. We try to avoid that because that may take a long time, longer than a 5-year time horizon, but where we have recommended that, that may only be able to be implemented later. And then finally, we encourage you to require accountability. Acquire accountability on the part of yourselves, the board, require accountability on the part of the school district staff that will be responsible for implementing this report. One of the examples of how you require accountability, different districts do it differently. You may put together a list, and every other board meeting, go back to the list. What are we doing with this recommendation 52? Is it up? Is it down? Or are we making progress? I think that one of the districts that best implemented the reports that we've ever done, I did a project for a school district of about 55,000 students a number of years ago, and gave them, it was a little deeper analysis, larger team than we did here. We gave them about 140 recommendations and presented the report, and 2 years later, I got a phone call from Judy, and I said, Judy, how you doing? She's like, oh, I'm doing fine. I said, what do you need? She says, well, we're working on recommendation 114, and we need, to talk about what you were thinking with that recommendation. It's my sincere hope that 2 years from now, I'll get a phone call from Dr. Title, you'll be working on recommendation 73, maybe 74, and wanting to know, about some ideas as to how you can implement that recommendation. So please require accountability of yourselves as you go through the report. That's the only way to get to transformational change. That concludes my official presentation. I'd be happy to take questions. I realize you just got the report, and if you have some specific questions, I'd be happy to address those. I have a couple copies back in the room. Yeah, not a ton. No, this one's not mine. It's all marked up. But I have about 7 or 8.
Take a brief break in between, so people can leave.
Sure. In fact, I'll take them back with me afterwards. They're all standing together, right? I recognize her. Yeah. Yep.
Is that off? All right, thank you for that presentation. Do any board members have questions at this time? I know we just saw this is the first time we've seen this.
Can we get a copy of the slideshow?
We do have one.
We do?
I think that was passed out. Right here. Right?
No,
Oh, we didn't get them? Okay.
Okay, thank
So we
you,
need a copy
thank
of the slideshow. All right.
Great.
Mr. Lowe, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question would be, and this is for all of us, is given that we're getting this right now, which is great, and I have no time to get all the part, is there any way we could ask Prismatic to come back by the next meeting or a meeting of the immediate future to answer our questions?
I suppose we could do something like that at a future meeting in the next month or so. Yeah, we can possibly do that. Mrs. Iacono?
Can I just make a suggestion that maybe once we have an opportunity to review this, we could put it on the agenda at the Finance Subcommittee meeting and then figure out a way to get it back to the board?
Mr. Carey?
To further that, in the interest of cost as well, maybe we want to cobble our questions together, write them down, send them into finance, and determine what the cost would be to email them to Prismatic versus having them come back. Because I know there's T&E involved with sending consultants around. I also have just one minor question. I haven't read this yet, but something stuck in my head when I heard the presentation. You mentioned increase in student meal prices.
Yes.
Which has been brought to our attention in the past. However, my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that because we're part of the federal school lunch program, those increases couldn't be used in other parts of our budget. They have to stay within the food budget.
Absolutely correct. Food service revenues accrued in the food service program can only be used for food service expenses. That is a federal requirement. However, your lunch prices, let's just go with, no, let's go with middle school. Your middle school lunch price right now for your type A meal is $2.15. Your peer average is $2.69. The reimbursement, every meal served that meets federal requirements gets some level of reimbursement. A free meal served to a student who qualifies for free meals gets a $2.72 reimbursement, I think is this year's level. So it stands to reason that the federal government did not intend for the district to subsidize meals to paid students on the backs of meals served to free students. So there is room to move. Now, those revenues accrue to the food service department, but I think it's important for you to realize that last year, 2009-10, the food service department incurred an operating loss. They covered this operating loss out of their reserves, which they are encouraged to have by the federal government. It's not a sustainable scenario, however. They incur an operating loss for several more years, and you're going to have to fund the food service program out of the general fund. Additionally to that, in the facilities chapter, chapter 7, we made a couple of recommendations to essentially require the food service fund to pay its own way in every area. Food service funds are allowed to pay for things associated with the operations of the program. For example, you can have the food service program pay for the utilities associated with running the kitchen. You're not currently doing that. Having the food service fund pay for that is about $100,000 and some a year additional. It essentially works out to be a revenue for the general fund. So we need to find a way to pay for those kinds of things. Raising the student prices is one way to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mrs. Wagner.
Just a comment on one. I liked that you referred to the high school opting out of lunch as a hyper-competitive. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's terrible that students don't have a scheduled lunch period. Been an advocate of getting that back into place for a while. I had two questions. On the buses with the triple tiering, when you say changing the bells, do you mean the bells at each individual school, or what is the more in-depth recommendation there?
You can do this a number of ways, transportation-wise. I mean, ideally, you work your system. You have to balance student needs, what you can do at the individual schools, with reducing your transportation expenditure. Because in Connecticut, you don't get reimbursement for transportation, by and large, general population transportation. So every dollar you save there is money you can spend elsewhere. Triple tiering would be the gold standard in your district, and any movement towards triple tiering would be helpful. Now, we threw in the research that supports a later start time for high school students. There's some other research out there that showed, ironically enough, a reduction in student vehicular accidents with a later start time for high school students, which is kind of a surprising piece. So that may be something to consider. There's nothing that says all of your elementary schools have to start at the same time. There's nothing that says your high schools have to start before your middle schools. And this is one of those ones where we took a stab at what the minimum cost savings might be, but how you implement that is entirely up to you. I think that it would be a good idea to look at perhaps 2 different start times for your elementary schools, maybe divide it geographically, and see what kind of a savings that gives you transportation-wise, and then move from there. I don't know that you can get to triple tiering, working on it over the summer, in complete triple tiering, because that would require a number of all schools to change their start times potentially, but maybe you could phase it in.
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Brand.
When I look at this, I think there's so much information in it in one night, it's actually overwhelming, which is quite frankly one of the reasons I think at least I'm having trouble coming up with a question. Because of that, then my next thought is, what's our next step? Do you have some kind of template that we can follow as a district? Because we're heading right now into budget season, which is always demanding, and this year will probably be even more so. So, you know, we want to do it better, we want to do it right, but do you have some kind of roadmap you can give us to help guide us as we try and pursue this?
I think that it says, as much as my heart lives in food service and transportation, the chapters are organized with with intention. Organization and management has the most systemic changes in them, and many of the highest dollar items, both savings and expenditures. And I recommend that you start there. Oftentimes, districts will agree to take, in some districts where we're limited to a 5-chapter structure, they take 1 chapter a month, and then they discuss 1 chapter a month. And what that would entail, board members have a chance to review the data, they have a chance to ask deeper questions of staff members in those areas, they have a chance to consider things in a more deep fashion. 11 chapters or 10 chapters, maybe 2 chapters a month. But there are a number of recommendations in there that they're high dollar, and I can give you some idea of what the breadth is in terms of expenditures. Let me see. The new central office structure we're recommending, that's one of those ones that's a net cost. It's about a $400,000 a year net cost, and we do that based on salaries for those positions plus an estimate for your benefits. We don't consider anything else that has that plays into retirement, those kinds of things. The high school reorganization plan, moving the house system to a principal-based structure, that's a savings of approximately $1.7 million. Discontinuing the internship program, that's a savings of about $200,000 a year, even considering in an expense for additional substitutes. Eliminating custodial summer overtime, not one that I talked about before, but one that popped up. That's about $80,000 in savings, and that's one of those ones you could probably implement tomorrow. The high school opt-out plan, based on a very conservative estimate of how many seats that would free up in the transportation system, requiring high school students who get a parking spot to opt out, is about $175,000 a year. So it's worth looking at. And that's, again, one that you could potentially do starting in the summer. One of the other ones I didn't talk about, touching on some of the instruction areas, moving to extended day only kindergarten. You currently have a couple of different models. You're probably much more familiar with them than I was. It took me a fair amount of time to understand what you're doing. But moving to extended day only is a savings of about $190,000 a year.
Extended day, not full day.
Correct. Absolutely in contrast to where I thought we were going to go with that. However, one of the things that we do try to work from is, in addition, part of what's best for students and what best supports student success is considering the research where it's available. And the research certainly supports that at the younger ages, K through 12, particularly kindergarten, very small group instruction has a positive impact on student achievement. And so extended day provides you with a model to keep that.
Can you elaborate on that? So you're referring to the program that we have where students go to school 3 days a week until 1:30
Yes.
and 2 days a week until 3:30.
Right.
The 2 days they're there, they're supposed to be in a class with 50% of the students there. So if we ran only that program, you're saying we would be saving money
Correct.
versus if we ran only full-day kindergarten.
Correct. And the reason you do that is because we looked at the bus cost. And currently, each extended day bus costs you $43.50. This is an example where those buses are idle anyway, so you're getting them cheap to run your extended day, middle of the day, take those kids home piece. That costs you about $150,000 a year. However, eliminating that doesn't necessarily mean you recoup all of those savings, because those children on the extended day buses now have to ride the regular bus. And we're unable to quantify that, because that really depends on, does that mean an extra bus route? Does that mean I have to change and add another route here or there? So we're unable to quantify what that additional expense might be. But reducing the kindergarten day to just the extended session frees up the need for music and PE teachers. And in this case, we're able to eliminate a couple of classes a week, because the children on full day get an extra session of music and PE that the children on extended day don't get. So now we're freeing up time, and that's a savings of about $189,000 a year.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the part where you said that the benefit of the small classes, please?
Education research is, it's hard to find good studies that will support what oftentimes we feel like we know what works. There is, at this point, almost no research that says anything at all about high school class sizes. that says that, a high school class of 23 kids is inherently better academically than a high school class of 25, 29, 50 kids. There's no research out there for that. The one area where we do have something to hang our hat on in terms of class size is lower elementary, particularly K through 3. And these studies are fairly old. They haven't been replicated in the last 10 years. But there is a study out there that says for younger elementary students, particularly kindergarten students, small group instruction is positively correlated with increased student achievement. And what you get with your extended day model is exactly that. They're not in the very small group all day long, but they get that piece when they're on their extended day. And so for that reason, we didn't go the direction I thought we were going to go.
And to follow up, that would mean you wouldn't recommend the blended class system
No.
that we're using either.
The blended class system seems like a great idea. You have probably, I'm looking at the list, probably more than half of your classes are on the blended day. And talking with your kindergarten teachers, we found a couple of issues with the blended. Let me see what they had to say about it. The teachers observed that they now have to pick and choose what they can teach after the extended day students leave. Sometimes they have to teach the same content twice because they're trying to balance out, oh, that kid got it, but that kid didn't get it with the blended program. In order to make it not repetitive, they have to come up with new work. They also don't have the number, they feel that students don't have the same amount of opportunities for hands-on learning experiences that they did with the pure extended day. And then there's also that break in period. The full-day students don't sit in the classroom and do something while the extended day students are leaving. They go out to the bus, take the kids, to get the other kids on the bus, so that there's a disruption and a loss of instructional time with that. So we, again, as I said, it was contrary to where I thought we were going to go, because I pegged that extended day from day one.
Yes,
But
I remember that
we
when we
recommend
met.
keeping that and moving it all to extended day only.
All right, great.
Stacy's on, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to move from kindergarten back to the high school for a
Yes, ma'am.
second. You mentioned that you couldn't find any studies to support that lower class size in the high school was beneficial? You couldn't find any?
Couldn't find any we're willing to hang our hat on. There's conflicting evidence. I mean, once you get to high school, secondary education, and then higher education, it's a very mixed bag of what you get. You can find a study that says, yeah, in my particular classroom, having 15 students in the classroom worked, but as far as finding a study that says 23 students is vastly better or even statistically significantly better than 25 students, that doesn't exist. And so we didn't make any recommendations on high school class sizes in here. There is nothing that says move to 50 students per class in the high school. I would have told you if that recommendation were in there.
And just, I mean, I agree with some of the other board members that, this is a lot of information for us to digest, and I think we should get all our questions together and possibly move this to the subcommittee.
Can I just ask, because I heard this, and I can't let this go by, because this is completely counterintuitive to what I thought we were going to find. You said that you're recommending adding staff to central office.
Yes, sir.
At a cost of $400,000, adding staff to central office.
And I will state that
Okay, I just want to make sure I heard that
Central
right.
office had the opportunity to provide input before you got your final report. So this was not.
Nothing to do with this report.
Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
I will swear to that.
Okay.
I can give you the numbers, though. In addition to, you've had about 9% enrollment in students over the last time period. You haven't grown your central office to keep pace with that, partly because it's hard to add, 9% of a person, but also you just have kept the lid on central office staffing. In comparison to your peers, and I will say this piece is a very inexact science because one person's director may be another person's team leader, one person's assistant superintendent may be another person's director. But we compared you to your peer districts, and I am trying to find it. Oh, it's over in chapter 5. We compared you to your peer districts and came up with a number that in comparison to the average, you're a couple positions below the average of your peers. And you saw who the peer districts were. And we did essentially a position count as best we could, trying to match, a curriculum leader, is that a curriculum leader over here and a director over here, trying to match that. You're essentially were a couple positions lower than the average. Now, what we did with that, and in order to address some of the siloing that we saw, we recommended a fairly significant change in your organizational structure. Again, we don't deal with personalities, we deal with structure. Structure drives results. And I think it will take some time to digest what we've recommended there, but we think we've recommended something that's more streamlined in the sense of it's much clearer who reports to whom, what jobs belong to which position, and what the chain of command is.
So, Tasha, so I understand this, but in order to implement that structure, we would need to add 2 central office administrators.
Yes.
Okay.
2.5,
I rest my case.
2.55, actually.
2 point what?
2.55.
2.55. Okay.
Any other questions?
Just a point.
Okay. Mrs. Alban, then Mr. Fataby, and then Ms. Iacona.
I too agree with the other board members. I mean, we've had an overview. I would like the opportunity to read the 260 pages and develop questions, but also because of some of the things that have been mentioned in the overview, and because we have a very full room and the press is here, I would hope that, including the press, they would wait for the 260 pages before we jump to too many conclusions here. Because while there may not be any definitive research on the size of a classroom for a high school student and the ability for a teacher to teach well and students to learn well in that setting, there's been very recent information that colleges at the higher education level are looking at having much smaller class sizes for that very purpose and for many other issues. And it's not just the learning that takes place in that classroom, but it is the connection a teacher makes with the student, because sometimes that teacher is the most important connection in that student's life in a given day. And there's a lot more than just teaching the math and the AP history that that student has. So I wouldn't want the press to start reporting that maybe we should have larger class sizes. That would just be my concern, that we read the full report first.
Yes, Mr. Fataby.
Yeah, just get back to the organizational structure again.
Yes.
The organizational structure you propose
Yes, sir.
and recommend, have you recommended that to other school districts?
In some pieces, yes. Is this this is the structure we always recommend? No, never. Some of the things, and we're looking at I apologize, we don't all have a copy of it, but we're looking at the structure on page 3-8. It's a very different looking structure than what currently exists. We are trying to address a couple of different things that we saw in the district. One of the things, and the overriding things, is the tie between administrative and instructional technology simply isn't there, or wasn't there at the time of our on-site visit. We need to work and leverage those resources together. That results in us recommending that at least for the next couple of years, the manager of technology report directly to the superintendent. It's the only way to get that position out of the place of serving 2 masters in the sense of administrative or instructional. So we're recommending that position move. We're very cognizant of the fact that the school district has a very involved public component. One of the things that has resulted in is oftentimes we district staff drop everything to address a concern from one parent. Now that concern needs to be addressed. We agree with that. How we do that can be done much more efficiently. And so we're recommending a new position. This is one of those new positions, an ombudsman communications officer position, tied directly to the superintendent. In some ways, the existing deputy superintendent position has filled some of those pieces in the past. We're recommending a full position to handle specifically those issues. And that's, again, just to address what we see in this district. The other piece that we saw, and we went back and forth on it a number of times, is a recommendation that, at least for the next several years, organizational structures don't have to be decided and then lived with for the next 50 years. Organizational structures can and should change in order to meet the new challenges of the day. But for at least the next several years, we're recommending that principals report directly to the superintendent. And the reason for that, we saw a fair amount of inconsistency within the schools in terms of each school was assigned position X. They were given 2 position X's from the central office. What they did with those position X's could have been vastly different. We saw a fair number of, this is how we do it here. I don't care what's going on at the other elementary school half a block away. We need to address those things because those are inefficiencies. And it's confusing for the public when things are not similar. It's a school district, not a collection of individual schools. It's not a confederation. So in answer to your question, some elements have shown up in previous reports. This specific organization chart, no. It is in keeping with one of the organization charts, some of the elements of some of the peers that we looked at. Not all the peers provided organization charts. We had to deal with a couple of lists of staff. But we think it's the structure for the district for at least the next few years.
I think Ms. Iacono was the next one.
I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody who was involved in this effort. It's really been a year in the making since we budgeted for this and got it moving. So I just wanted to say thank you, especially to the central office staff. I know Mrs. McWayne spent a lot of time on this and Mrs. Fitzgerald, so thank you, along with all of the staff, the time that they took. And I also wanted to say thank you to Carolyn Richmond from the RTM, who represented that body on this committee, who originally sought out Prismatic, and also Bob Stone, who's a member of the Board of Finance. Just obviously looking at this for hardly a minute, it seems like it's going to be a really good read, and there are some really positive things that I think can come out of this. So I personally am very happy. I'm glad it came to fruition. So thank you very much, and thank you for all of the staff time that this took to put together.
Okay. All right, we're about at our hour on this matter here, and I'll take recommendations from other members of the board. Obviously, we have to read this thing. I would suggest that we read it and that we submit questions to the Finance Committee. Maybe that's our first step. And then, but the other thing I want to throw out there, if Finance and Dr. Title are looking at things in this report and they think there are certain things that that we can do for this upcoming fiscal year, I don't have a problem with Finance and Dr. Title and the administration suggesting some things. Is that okay? Go ahead, Mrs. Brand.
You know what, just as you're saying this, I'm thinking when I look at all of this, Finance is also going to be working and doing budget as well. So if when you guys are looking at it, when Dr. Title's looking at it, when the Finance Committee takes their first gander at it, if we want to have a conversation as to how each subcommittee may be able to help tackle some of this, obviously it's an audit, so there's money involved, but this is a large undertaking.
Absolutely.
So if we all can contribute, that might be very helpful.
I mean, Dr. Title, do you have any suggestions? Go ahead.
Well, it's coinciding with the budget that we're doing right now. So I know I did talk to the board about, I believe that I need to review this with the staff, with the departments, and get some reaction on each recommendation and bring that forward to the board in whatever form or fashion we want to do that. That's not going to happen in time for this budget. However, if I look at this and I see something in there that I feel we can implement as part of the budget upcoming, I'll put it in there and I'll label it that way. So when I present the budget to you in January, I'll say, here's a recommendation, if there is one. I mean, this is quick. If there is something in there, low-hanging fruit, aha, we could save $100,000, Prismatic recommended X, it's in my budget, here it is, I'll flag it for you. And the board, of course, when you review the budget, you can decide to throw that out and say, you may have thought that was a great idea, but we think it's worth $100,000. So if there's something that we can turn around quickly into this budget, I don't know if there is. If there's something we can turn around quickly into this budget, then I'll try to put it in my proposed budget, and you'll have a look at it there. Then I think we need to come up with a longer-term plan. And then we need to go through, think what I can do with you, and again, how we do this, what committee, that's sort of up in the air. Come back with sort of a response, almost like we do for our NEASC. It's like a NEASC report, right? Okay, recommendation 1, we agree with it, we think we can do it over the next year. Recommendation 2, we agree with it, it's going to take 2 to 3 years. Recommendation 3, might save money, bad idea, I don't recommend it. In other words, just go through them all. And then we have a discussion about that. So I don't know how much of this will find its way in here into the current budget, but so that's how I would try to go at it. So if you'd let me sort of take the lead a little bit on it, but we want to get questions from you. And we're going to get questions to Tasha So we definitely want that part to happen. But in terms of getting this stuff or really looking at this and getting a lot of it into the budget that is due to you, like in the second week in January, don't hold your breath.
That's fine. And
Okay.
I kind of was anticipating that there probably wasn't a lot we can do this budget year, but if there's something, that's great. So what we're going to do now is, let's read it as board members. If we have questions, submit those questions to the Finance Committee. That's how you want to handle it at this point? Yes? I'm sorry. All right. So what we're going to do is, we're obviously going to read this audit, 200-plus pages, and board members are going to submit questions to the finance to have Tasha and her group answer those questions. And we'll take that first step, and if there's something that Dr. Title recommends that we can implement for this upcoming budget year, recognizing that we're already in the budget year, then he will make those recommendations. So that's how we're going to leave it. So we're going to move on. We're going to take a 5-minute break because we have to set up for the next presentation. If you want to stay, great. If you don't, that's okay too. Thank you.
I am